This video, I'm going to go over some first steps in working on your collage. On Canvas, I've posted some design resources that have links for getting images. And there's some links for good stock, which is free stock images. And typically when you go to some of these free stock image places, you'll get good resolution images. And some of them are limited, the ones that are free, but because in collage making you might need some clouds, or you might need a skyline, or you might need a building or something, then they're pretty good resources for finding specific image elements that you might find helpful. The New York Times also has royalty-free images in their digital collection, and they have an extensive collection and a lot of vintage prints and photographs and illustrations. And then there's a few links here that you can check out. I've also posted a few video tutorials that I made, which works with the quick selection tool and refine edge, and other selection tools like the polygonal lasso tool, which works really good for geometric shapes that you need to select. And then there's also demonstration on the layer mask. So there's lots of different techniques for making selections depending on the source imagery that you're using. Just getting to know how the tools work and which ones work good in certain situations helps you master different kinds of selections. The first thing you do is look for imagery and information, and so I ended up putting together a handout that I'm going to share with you. It works as my mood board, and it also has a little bit of information about the roots of modernism. So one of the things I found out was that the roots of modernism goes back to the latter part of the 19th century. And Henri Matisse, the French artist who lived from 1869 to 1954, his life seems to support this idea I have about modernism, the roots of modernism, starting in the late 19th century. So I found a painting that he did in 1896, and this was when he was 27 years old. And so he was probably still studying painting at this point, or learning how to paint at this time. And you can see here that he was working kind of in the same vein as an earlier French painter, Chardin, who lived from 1699 to 1799. So here, the young Henri Matisse is emulating an 18th century painter. And you can see that the paintings have similar tonality. It's very low contrast colors. There's a lot of dark shadows. And even the subject matter is very similar. These still lifes that typically had fruit and perhaps a vase, and they were set up on a table that was apparently a wooden table with some kind of a cloth over top of it. And you can just see that the influence in this painting goes back at least 100 years. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And then if you move forward in time to 1910, there is something really drastically different going on between the style that he painted in the late 19th century and then the style he's painting in the early part of the 20th century. It's quite well known that a lot of the Western European painters in the late part of the 19th century, the Impressionists, and then thereafter Matisse, were looking outside of France for inspiration and to develop a new aesthetic that seemed more in line with their modern sensibility. And they looked to the Japanese printmaster Hiroshige and his woodblock prints. So to get from the first painting to the second painting, there was a little bit of Japanese woodblock printing involved. And that was a rejection of the canon of artistic practice that had come before that. The Impressionists were really radical. Now we look at them as just being masters and accepted, but when they first started their paintings, they were ostracized, they were shunned from exhibiting, And it's a really interesting period of art history. The modernism movement in the United States, I've broken down into two periods, and this is my mood board. And I was really interested in the two periods of modernism. And the first period I identified between 19 and 1940. This is a little contrived because it's very difficult to pinpoint specific times of modernism. But for the sake of trying to get a handle on the topic, I thought, okay, I'm going to break it into 1900 to 1940, and then circa 1940, so and onward. So the first part, 1900 to 1940, most definitely the modernism was connected to the avant-garde. The avant-garde was considered by some to be a hallmark of early modernism. In their early careers, modern artists such as Man Ray, Ernest Hemingway, and Louis Armstrong had more success in Paris than they did at home in the United States. And here's an inspiration picture I thought was really fun. And this is a Louis Filler who's dancing, and she was from Chicago. And this is a picture of her dancing around 1900. And this picture is believed to have been taken at an exposition. They used to have these big universal expositions every few years, and they attracted millions, and it was a showcase of different countries and things they had invented, and a showcase of their arts and their technologies and their business and products. They were brand affairs. And so she was one dancer in the exposition that occurred in 1900 in France, and she was a celebrity of the exposition. And I thought this picture was just beautiful. I also was inspired by this picture because it's got great lines, and Louis Armstrong is a legend. So, but a lot of these people got no respect in their day. There's also a picture here of Man Ray, who was just an amazing American artist. He lived a lot in Paris, and he was completely avant-garde. And if you do a Google for Man Ray, you'll see some just amazing photography, and he was doing things at the time that nobody else was doing. So he was completely avant-garde and very clever. I was reminded again about the Bodini typeface, and a lot of times typefaces get reinterpreted and reinvented over the years, and Bodini is one of those typefaces that has spawned probably hundreds of variations of the typeface. In the time that it was released, it was said to be a classical typeface because it had such perfect harmony in its proportions. But then over time, as the typefaces evolved and developed, Bodini was classified as a modern typeface. And so in that sense, it fits in with my modernism theme. So I'm going to use this typeface in my collage. And when I looked at this photograph, I saw the V letter in Bodini, and I saw a lot of angles that seem to be consistent with the V typeface, even though the shapes are quite sharp and stark. And like Bodini is known for having these hairline serifs and extreme weight difference in the stroke between really thin and really thick. But I saw some things that emerged, this V shape. So I picked the letter V, and I'm going to work with that in my collage, and I'm going to use this as one of my source photographs. So my mood board has helped me get started with my collage, and I'll show you a few techniques in Photoshop that might help you out with your collage.